Yes, and we are live. Welcome, welcome. This is Studio LINKIT from the Meern here in the Netherlands. Today we're going to have a panel show. So maybe not something you're used from us. Normally we do a presentation, but we thought let's invite people here and talk about a subject that we love, which is the combination between cloud and innovation. So before we start, a couple of things, couple of house rules to be aware of. First of all, please turn off your camera. I think Petra still has her camera on, so if you could please turn that off. Also, if you have your microphone off, just keep your microphone off for the whole session. We won't ask for questions from the audience in that way. If you have any questions, and please do, because we have experts here that love to answer your questions, put them in chat. So just write them down whenever it pops into your head. You don't have to wait until there's a silence. Because I have a lovely colleague behind the laptop that will send the questions to me once they come in. And that colleague is Gino.
Hello, good afternoon everyone.
Gino will let me know whenever, and whenever there's a question up, he will ask it to this camera. He will pop back up on this side to ask the question. Anything else? Yeah, we will send the recording to you at the end of the session, so you don't have to write with it. If you want to, of course, you're welcome to. Maybe it helps you concentrate on the session, but at the end of the session, we'll send the recording. Same for the people that did want to be here, but were not able to, that we have their email, we sent the recording over. And I think that's it. Please send the questions in chat. Let's start with our experts. We have three lovely experts here, both on the cloud and innovation topic. So maybe Dick, first for you to introduce. Dick, what do you have with cloud and what is your role here?
Yeah, I have 10 years of experience in cloud. I'm a certified cloud solution architect. Within LINKIT, I have the role of a lead principal for the cloud squad. So my responsibility is to make sure that we have the right composition of people and professionals, that they have the right knowledge, and I try to build business propositions for LINKIT to serve our customers, of course.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. Thank you very much. We'll dive into that in a moment. Next with Maaike. Maaike, you are our innovation expert here at LINKIT, right?
Yeah, that's true, Thomas. Yeah, so I have a background actually in product design. I studied strategic product design at the Technical University of Delft, but I always worked in IT. So first at a cloud startup, and about 3 years ago I joined LINKIT when we were moving from, besides being a sourcing company, to also do IT innovations, make them custom for our clients. So I'm now in the role of leading those innovation projects together with my team, but also am responsible starting from this year of our innovation lab in which we build our internal innovations.
Great. I love to hear from that later on. But we'll first go over to Thatcher. Thatcher, you have a very special connection between cloud and innovation, right?
Yes, and first of all, thank you for inviting me here, Thomas, and LINKIT. I think it's very nice to be able to speak and have a panel discussion. I do have a very special relation to cloud and innovation. Like, also studied product design, and I've always been like a product design nerd, as I describe myself, going between the deep technology and okay, so what is the product that people actually like to use? And in that role, I'm now also the chief business officer and co-founder of Leaf Cloud, which is a company that really innovates how cloud is made. So the actual stuff behind what you typically use. And I think it will be nice today to talk a bit of both, how you use cloud and also how cloud is actually made.
Great, great. So as you can see, many different experts we have around. Thatcher, I want to continue on that. So I looked at your website, of course. I was seeing the innovation you were doing with a focus on the green cloud. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Of course. So Leaf Cloud is fundamentally a cloud company in the sense that we rent out servers like VMs and storage and networking and all the kind of things that you expect from a cloud provider, rentable by the hour and so forth. But we do one thing fundamentally different in that we are actually carbon negative. What we do is we reuse the energy that our servers produce. Normally this is very hard to do in big data centers because data centers are far away and there's nowhere that they can use the heat for in a purposeful way. And so what we do is we actually take out the servers out of the data center and we put them in places like apartment buildings, where locally we can actually have the heat that our servers produce be reused for heating that apartment building. And we focus on tap water, so also in summer we take care of that. I think good to say that by doing so we are a cloud provider that offers cloud services like everybody else does, but like a choice that is way more sustainable for the customer, like for the customer being the person who uses our cloud.
Okay, so that's indeed a very nice connection between cloud and innovation. And these kind of ideas always start in a certain place. How does an idea like this start, and how do you develop that?
So there was a company before that I actually joined. That's founded by a couple of friends of mine actually, and they worked with that for a couple of years. And I joined that company. Later, when that company ended, like me and some other people, we were not quite done with that story yet, and said, no, there were a couple of things that we didn't do right the first time. We should do those things right also. In particular, I'm talking about things like safety, security, reliability. And so in Leaf Cloud, we've actually solved those issues. And on that premise, we refounded this company based on some existing ideas and also quite a bit of extra innovation.
Okay, extra innovation.
In particular around the architecture of our cloud. What we do is very special, in particular on the network architecture. So what we do is we have presence in the normal tier 3 data center, like very high class with all the bells and whistles, redundant everything. But there we have mostly and only our storage. From there, we run dark fiber connections to what we call leaf sites. And these leaf sites are places where we have most of our compute set up, and that are actually in these basements and these heating rooms of buildings. And so then we disaggregate our compute and our storage in such a way that the heat is actually produced where it's needed, and yet the data will never be lost if someone would break in or it would be damaged or stolen or whatever might happen on such a leaf site, because these are not true data centers. That would also defeat the purpose, because then you're building more data centers. And this architecture change, if you will, is completely possible because of the speed of light. I could talk much more about it, but this key innovation, together with us doing a real cloud infrastructure on top of that, software-wise, allows us to deliver very normal cloud services in a way that's fundamentally different in how it's built up.
Okay. So you have a sort of example of a couple of new innovations that are happening within the cloud.
Yeah.
I think there is like another connection between innovation and cloud when you're talking about it being sort of one of the new technologies coming up. I think some companies are starting to work with it more and more. But as you probably also noticed, it's not easy to start implementing that within your organization, right? Is there something that, I think, Dick, you have some experience with this. What is the best way to start implementing such some solution like that within your organization? What do you need to think about?
Yeah, I think whether you're talking about cloud or any other technology, you first have to prepare for this new technology because it probably demands some knowledge or some skills. So first of all, you have to make sure that your company is ready by training your people, maybe hiring the right people, and often that implies something like a big change in your company. And in order to do so, you have to also have commitment from your company. So from my perspective, technology can never be the goal, but if you think, in this case, for example, cloud could have some benefits for your company, think about making sure that you have the right commitment, think about the right business case, and first start preparing to be ready for that new technology before you start with it, because otherwise it can really backfire.
Yeah, because I think that's also related to a question we got from the audience. We also got questions on forehand, for example, from Anjali Hagort-Mulder, who asked how to integrate innovation into the standing organization, connecting without getting stuck in it. So that's something that...
Yeah, because innovation is also about adopting new technology, Most of the time you first start exploring this. Does it bring the value that you expect? What kind of knowledge do I need? You will do some trial and error there. And finally, if you decide on adoption, then you need to make sure also that the continuity is assured. So you probably need more people with the same knowledge to have a kind of an assurance there. And so innovation also means making sure that you govern your knowledge within your company when you decide to adopt things.
Yeah. Do you see that going wrong sometimes, or?
Yeah, sometimes in cloud, I've seen some examples there that people stated, well, we don't need this specific knowledge or skills because we have very experienced people that have all kind of certifications as a system administrator. And then they think that cloud technology is kind of the same as managing a physical machine, which is not, because it has different approaches, different processes. And they start with cloud, making all the mistakes that you can possibly make, and then claiming something like, yeah, the promises are not met. Cloud promised to be cheaper or faster or scalable, and it is not. But most of the time in this case, in these examples, what you notice is that they started off with the wrong knowledge, with the wrong skills, with the wrong strategy, and therefore they don't get the benefits that cloud promises, for example.
Okay, very interesting. So there's like a few things you need to set up before you start integrating these kind of new technologies.
Yeah, sure.
I'm curious from Mike, from an innovation point of view, what are some of the sort of building blocks that you have to have ready before you start integrating these kind of new technologies?
Yeah, thanks for the question, because I find it very interesting. As Dick is explaining, you need quite a lot to integrate it in your current organization. And that's also why, from an innovation perspective, you could choose, and it's actually recommended, to not integrate it in the beginning, especially, of course, when you look to external innovation, so new products, new services. They say, okay, make a spin-off, put it completely besides your current organization, so you don't run into issues where it doesn't integrate with the existing technology, it doesn't integrate with our existing processes. Have a small team, give them their own goals. Don't be slowed down if it doesn't fit the vision or the goals of the company. But really make them motivated to make the best out of it, regardless of what is around. And then at one point, if it's successful, you can choose either to integrate it and make more use of what's already there, or perhaps to keep it separate and say, okay, it's just going to be a separate BV. They have all the tools within the organization to make that successful.
Okay, because we had a question from Harry van Dormalen. And he was wondering what our best example was of integrating an innovation or creating a new innovation. I want to formulate it differently and ask, do you have an example of somewhere where you learned a lot from it, where it maybe didn't go as expected?
Yeah, sure. I think in general, the goal of innovation is to learn from it. So either successful or not, you might know Lean Startup, build, measure, learn. So the most important thing you can do with innovation is actually have that learning cycle and evolve and learn from it. But definitely also learn that it can go wrong. I think an interesting example is that when the first lockdown just started because of Corona, all of a sudden we had quite some people that became available, because you saw that the people that were working for clients, those clients got a little bit scared of what might happen. So we started working on a machine learning ops platform very much from a technical perspective. So they started building what they were missing before in their work. But after the MVP was built, we noticed that we actually didn't validate that well enough with our clients. So we tried selling it after already quite some development work was put in. And saw that it was not really responding with our clients as we had hoped. So it was a great technical solution, but at that point we were at least not able to find the right market fit for it. So definitely because of that, we start that process very differently. So technology is still an important pillar of innovation, and as LINKIT, we're very much focused on technology, so it will be in our core. But way earlier in the process, we start looking at the other two pillars, being the users and the business viability as well.
Yeah, sounds like a good lesson learned indeed. Yeah. I see we have questions from the audience. Before going into that, so LINKIT has all the technology knowledge, all the different expertises to start creating these kind of innovations, or?
We have a lot.
Okay.
Also, we choose not always to do everything, but over the last years, from an innovation perspective, we've been really focusing on a couple of technologies, being AI and data engineering, cloud, of course, why we are here, and that's cloud automation and IoT, but also full stack application development and low code. But that's also evolving. So over the years, we've been attracting new technologies. We've been stopping some as well. We've always been, well, with events like this, we do a lot of knowledge sharing, but we're also very connected with the market and look out for IT trends. So we're able to start new technology clusters. We try. We definitely do. And I think from that perspective, pretty successfully as well to grow those new teams.
Okay, good to hear. Yeah, innovation starts with trying indeed. If you don't start experimenting, then you never can get to that point.
No, I was actually going to respond to Micah's comment about, if you want to do innovation, then it helps to put it out in like an isolated segment or later on even BV or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've seen some customers do very successfully is that they started a new project, even if they had existing cloud deployments on another cloud or hyperscaler, where they said, okay, this project is actually a very good candidate to try something new. And it could be like new technology, something untested before, or a different provider. And the customers that have done so, I've seen them being very successful in doing so, because it actually reduces the risk of saying, okay, I'm going to do a full-on like migration to something that's unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives them the opportunity and the time to develop that as they are growing the project. And then as it matures, they understand, what is the real value and how much do I get from that? So I see that that's actually a very good kind of approach that I see customers of ours actually also taking.
Yeah, nice, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we continue on that, I think it's nice to get the first question from the audience. Gino, are you ready for the first question?
I am, and I think Marta is also ready for the answer. Marta has a question. Is it easier to innovate using the cloud, and if yes, why?
Is it easier to innovate using the cloud, or why? I think
I can give a response on that. So, for example, when I was ambitious and wanted to do something with machine learning, for example, or kind of cognitive services like 10 years ago, I had to buy this big server and I had to hire all these smart people and before I could even start. And I've seen companies investing a lot of money, for example, to start a case like that. Nowadays, I can go just to my room at my home, open the cloud and get the same services there and pay per second or per minute. So it really democratizes everything, and it makes technology available for a lot of people. Yeah. So I definitely think that cloud can help you with that. Yes.
Okay. And definitely, if you put it literally in people's houses, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, it makes such a difference. One of the things that I think, rightfully so, the cloud is often criticized by is kind of the ease of which you use it, right? Like, and by doing so, the bill that you end up having, oftentimes, And what is interesting is that the bill, whether you are paying for it or you get it even in credits from someone who says, okay, here's 100,000 in credits, what you have to realize is that there's real energy that is being used behind that number, might not cost you much at first, but it does cost impact for you and for the environment. And this, I think, is really where the difference is. I think it's good to mention also that we don't put our servers in your home. We have large partners, and so it's not something that we don't link these things together.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. That's very true. But if you want a server in your home, if you're open for it,
then if you live in Amsterdam West,
mm-hmm.
not too far from a data center, because we really value the super high performance that we currently deliver, and you are the owner or know of a large location where we can install these couple of racks, then please hit me up.
Great, that's good to know. So for everyone in Amsterdam West watching right now, where do they need to go to?
leave.cloud, our website. Yeah.
Great. That's the bit of marketing between the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta, for the question. So keep them coming. If there's more questions from the audience, let us know. Gino is ready to be on camera again, I think. Dick, so we've talked a little bit about the current situation that you have within your organization, trying to implement these technologies. What kind of requirements do you need to think about when you try to switch from your current legacy system towards the cloud? So we talked about innovation, but cloud specific, what are the things that are very important?
Yeah, legacy application is a kind of broad definition, I guess, because it depends.
Oh, sorry, by the way, question from Kees Messenmaker from the audience.
Yeah, I would say it depends. So normally you start first with a kind of what is the business demand here? Why do you want to put this application in the cloud? For example, maybe your hardware is outdated and you want to save some money and you don't want to do the investment. Or maybe because the technology is end of life and you really need to replace it. So first of all, you take a look at the business case, what is the why, and also, for example, things like how many budget, what is the time that is required for the business to get there. And then you define some kind of strategy. And within cloud we have these R strategies, like you can refactor your application, maybe first rebuild it on-prem and then move it to the cloud, or maybe just first do a rehost, move it to the cloud first and then change it. Or you can have all kinds of approaches, or maybe even replace it for a SaaS solution, for example. Like maybe you have an Exchange server on a local premise and you replace it for something like Office 365, for example. So it really depends on what the requirements are, what the need is, what the business case is, what you're going to do. But I think that whatever technology you have, there will be some kind of solution. Maybe not using just one cloud provider, but maybe using multiple, or sometimes ending up with some hybrid stuff. What is required is not like a black and white answer on that.
It's really different for the different companies that you might be working with, organizations. Any examples of requirements that came from one of the clients you used to work for with, or organizations that was completely different from what you've done before?
Sometimes, for example, you really have a very old application using an old technology and they don't want to change anything on the application itself, but they really want to get rid of the hardware and the operational stuff and move it into the cloud. So you maybe pack it into a container, for example, and just publish it in the cloud. It could be very easy. So you just re-platform the stuff. Maybe, for example, the example I already gave, you don't want all the operational hassle in operating an Exchange environment with mail servers, etc. You just source everything out to a SaaS environment is also an option. But also sometimes, for example, big companies, they have a lot of applications exchanging data, different formats of data, for example. They need to communicate and they have a lot of trouble in how to connect and getting this communication up and running because they have all these different schemas, etc., different protocols. So sometimes you end up with building a kind of a facade, abstracting all those legacy applications and building one endpoint for communication. So you can have all kinds of different approaches there.
I can imagine you have different pressures also in your organization for start implementing it. As you said, it could be like we're at the end of our cycle and we need to start doing this because otherwise everything will drop. And maybe there's some innovator in the company that says, hey, this is the future, otherwise we can't go further.
And then also the pace is kind of determined by maybe you have this dot on the horizon, but how to get there demands. And I've told this before already, you need some skills or some knowledge. So it depends on a lot of stuff before you can really start with these new technologies and phasing out those legacy applications.
Okay.
And I can imagine that you already said, like you have customers that start with the first maybe small application. I see an overlap here again with innovation where you can innovate on a number of levels. So you can do incremental innovation, adjacent and transformational. And everybody, when they think about innovation, they want to be the next Uber or the next Airbnb. but maybe not start there, but start with something that is closer to what you already do, that is less of a risk, it's easier to make impact. And I think the same goes for technology. So if the first thing you're working with cloud is migrating your core legacy application, yeah, high risk, you don't have a lot of knowledge yet, so, well, I think a pretty big chance of failure. Maybe start with something smaller.
Yeah, and innovation is not always doing this great new stuff. It can also be just adopting new technology which is new for you. Can be already existing technology, but if it's new for your organization and you have to change processes and you have to change your people, etc., then it's also kind of an innovation, yes.
Yeah, fully agree.
I think you have different levels of innovation here. Yeah.
Yeah. Mike, you were talking about incremental, adjacent, and what was the third one?
Transformational.
Well, for the people at home that don't know these terms, what is the difference between these different types of innovation?
Yeah, so it's basically a skill. So you start with incremental, which is more in the core of what you do. So it could be a smaller change in your technology, in your processes, in your business model. Adjacent is the layer around, probably still approaching the same market or the same client, but with a different technology, or the other way around. Use your core business model, but approach new markets. And then if you go transformational, you're really looking into changing everything. So doing different business case, business model, different customers, for example. And as a rule, they say that you should do around 70% of incremental or core innovation, 20% adjacent innovation, and 10% transformational innovation. So really don't be too afraid, indeed, as Dick is saying, to make small steps from where you are at the moment, because that can also be very successful.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny, like if I look at what we're doing as a relatively small and like a relatively new cloud provider, we're constantly improving. Even like on my own level, like I something silly. I set up the colors on my terminal yesterday, to be better next time I debug a customer issue, right? And then like I constantly do this, it's constantly working on improving my own workflow, so that when I get to so now I have this customer question that asks, hey, how would you solve this with some open source solution? We can go in there, look, I can actually solve this in a different way, and then also getting to the large things. We're gonna do a complete makeover of technology, and which is going to be fundamentally different. And also to say, I really like the role that I have, which is both working with customers and on technology itself, because I also often see that the value is all across, and if customers get a better flow, better solution solving, then that's really nice to see.
Yeah, and I think it's also probably easier on your journey to have these ping pong, these translations between the business side, technology side, to understand and talk to both.
Yeah.
To understand how they can help each other, right?
Yeah, totally. Because in our company itself, we're I mentioned my terminal, but we do this also on the entire OpenStack platform and everything. What's also really cool about OpenStack, it's a shared system. So we developed actually together with other cloud providers and research institutions and universities and so forth, and they all contribute to making the system better. It's one of the biggest open source projects in the world, and so many people contribute to it. It's every time you find an issue and I file something, then someone says, I've had this tool, let me go fix it. And they're constantly improving this major system. And in our own sphere, we're constantly improving our infrastructure and networking and so forth. And this is then together, I think, while each change itself doesn't look like much, then if you add this up in 2 years, you see whoa, this is a major difference from where we started.
Mm-hmm. Incremental. To some point, it becomes
they end up being something big. Yeah.
You started talking about open source. What kind of role, Dick, do you see for open source in the future for cloud?
Yeah, I think what is already mentioned, we have a big development force all over the world that you can use to create big applications. So don't invent stuff yourself, what's already been invented and is maybe of very good quality. So that's something that you can reuse and build upon. And I think that's also kind of the idea behind cloud. You have a lot of PaaS services, so ready-made to use platform services that you don't have to rebuild or build yourself. You can just configure them and implement them into your solutions. So I think, yeah, that's also the big benefit of open source and cloud also, yeah.
Do you think it's an accelerator for innovation? Do you think it will?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's incredible. Like, you know, like I'll use the like obvious quote, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants. But like literally all that we're doing is like the top part on such a massive amount of like open source and useful code that other people have already made, so that we can actually do innovations like making it green. Like it would have been unimaginable to start a cloud provider from scratch had there not been such platforms. But also what I think is very good to mention is that it also reduces risk. If we talk about this, okay, what is the risk in the project? Let's say that you do choose for something, for a new technology. Oftentimes there's also the question that the customer has, what technology should I pick? If you go look for something, you find like a plethora of like proprietary software vendors and platforms. And by choosing one, you also like kind of like you take that gamble, right? And what is interesting about open source is that if it happens to be that you pick the technology right, but maybe the provider not so much, or if it's about the ownership of your data, you can actually move, which is cool. So if you would start with Leaf Cloud, for example, with Kafka or a database or something like this, if you implemented all of this open source, and like for whatever reason you don't like us anymore, then you can easily move this in its entirety to a different provider, also providing OpenStack and so forth, and reducing that underlying risk of having this kind of lock-in. And I think that helps in like, you know, making the right decisions in where to innovate towards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, although I have a little bit the opinion that a lot of companies are worried about lock-ins, yes, when they select something, when they pick a specific cloud provider, they are afraid to move. But from my opinion, data will be the biggest lock-in in the future, because you mentioned you can, of course, move data, but the fact is that people are collecting a lot of data, and when you want to transfer that data to another provider, it can be a kind of problematic sometimes. It can take a lot of time, or you have to use services to really physically move your data. So I'm not really worried about technology, but I think my concern is more like how am I going to move the data if I want to change my provider or move it somewhere else. But that's more what I see happening, because everybody is collecting a lot of data, massive amounts, especially, for example, in IoT. Yeah, you've seen a lot of data gathered, and yeah, how are you going to move that? Yeah, it can be done, of course, but it will take you a lot of effort.
Yeah, IoT also one of these new sort of innovative technologies. Do you think these is something IoT specific that is like ahead of cloud, or people started using it right now?
I don't think it's IoT specific, because I think a lot of companies they think, and they have the firm belief that data consists a lot of insights that they need to improve their business. But they still don't know where they can find those hidden gems or these insights, so they're just collecting everything. And yeah, it piles up really fast. And so it's not specifically IoT, but I think also cloud, because storage in cloud is often very cheap, that also kind of makes it more easy to decide to store just everything instead of being selective. In early days, when you didn't have cloud, you had to pay for service and storage, and then you would think twice before you stored everything. But now it's more like affordable and more easy to store. But I think that's maybe the biggest risk for companies, when you decide to move your stuff and you have a big pile of data. That could be the most difficult part to move.
Yeah.
It's also one of the things that is very vendor lock-in. Like you see a lot of the large providers charging no fees for money coming into the cloud.
Yeah, true.
But the premium for money for data going out of the cloud is very high.
Yeah.
And also, what's interesting, I really, it's not about promoting Leaf Cloud per se, but it's there's one thing I still want to mention still, is that what we do is that we say, we're going to try to just solve this problem, kind of, at least from our side, by not charging any egress fees to other cloud providers. So that if you want to transfer data from us to Azure, it's free, right? And then what you get is, okay, so now we are actually making a more level playing field, stimulating that innovation. Go build something across clouds, use those things that Azure is amazing at, and I feel that this is something that in the cloud industry we should do more together, because things should land where the provider is the best, because they are the best, and not because they are the ones who already have your data.
Yeah, we might come back later to the playground idea also, because I like that idea of having everything available, and then you can just start experimenting and seeing what you can do with that data, because you can store it in one place. But before that, I think we have another question from the audience. Gino.
Yeah, we have a question from Chrisje. The question is, how do I identify my starting point? How do I know what others or partners have created before me? So that's a question from Christian to the panel. And I also wanted to remind you to the question of seats that you should have on one of those cards.
Okay.
Special attention to that one, because I see that Seats is in a meeting, so it would be nice if he can also get an answer.
Yes, then we'll go for that one after the question from the audience. Someone wants to pick it up. Can you remind us again for the...
Yeah. So the question from Chrisje is, how do I identify my starting point? How do I know what others or partners have created before me?
Okay.
I'd be happy to respond, because I think the most important thing is starting. So even if you end up making some bad decisions in the beginning, then you can learn about that along the way. And also because in the end, those solutions for it could be they have to solve that issue that you're solving. So they have to solve something and add value, or solve something for the user or the business. And as long as you don't start somewhere, it might be very difficult to actually find out if that's the case. Of course, it doesn't mean, again, putting a lot of risk in it or making big investments. So find out what's the small way to start it. Sometimes it can even be by making a prototype, having interviews with the business, indeed trying out the first solution, running a proof of concept. So decide what's, I think most people know the minimal viable product, but really go back to the core of what's the MVP, what's the smallest thing that I can do to start delivering value, and make sure that you learn from it.
And when you do that together with partners or with customers, create some kind of open innovation, what are things you learned from that?
So one of the things that we now do with clients as well is a design sprint. So design sprint is a way, it's invented by Google, but it's a way to come from an idea to a validated prototype in 1 week. So actually, in the first 2 days, you go to explore the idea and find solutions from it. The third day is about prototyping, so making a clickable version of the application that you want to build. And then you start testing that with the real user. So already in 1 week, you have feedback from the users about the solution. So in our case, we did one, for example, with a manufacturing company that had this idea about a very technical solution to design the products that they're manufacturing. And when the client explained it to me 3 times and showed me a very extensive Excel, I was like, maybe we shouldn't start building this, but we should validate it first. And that turned out to be a very successful way of getting to understand what was needed, talking with different stakeholders, and making with a small investment have a step to actually invest something where you will know that it's worth it.
You're saying validating, but what do you mean with validating it first? What's the key there?
Yeah, so that's basically talking with people. So you have different ways to validate and get feedback of your ideas. But we truly believe in just starting the conversation with the real people, and that can be as easy as in a design sprint we interview 5 people about a solution, and they say that with 5 people you already have 85% of the insights. So you learn already a lot about what you're doing. And if you don't do that, you'll you will always design it or develop it from your own perspective of it, but you will never know if it will resonate with the actual user.
Seems quite simple talking to people. Is it something that you have to talk a lot about, or?
Yeah, you'd be surprised. But it's also something we learned at LINKIT because, as I said, we started from being a sourcing company. And the first project we did, we just put 3 developers on a project and they started building something. And then along the way, we found out that we could have made different decisions by talking with the client and its users earlier on. And I think that still happens a lot because a lot of people are just very enthusiastic about technology and they dive deep into what they know. But talking with people can help a lot to broaden that view and get a better feeling of the actual requirements and goals. So it's definitely not not difficult. There are some tips and tricks, of course, to it, but.
Do you think you're talking about Mike about indeed having this passion for technology and sometimes then forgetting the steps before? Do you see that in cloud too? That people just go like, I want to have the cloud, this is for me?
Yeah, and next to an architect, I'm also a developer. And developers are very fond of technology and they always want to use the newest and latest and greatest. Without thinking about what the consequences could be sometimes. So that is certainly a risk. So what I always propagate is that you should have also some technology governance in place. So have a procedure in place in how do you select the right technology for the purpose that you are looking and not just adopting anything. Make sure that you have some guidance for yourself, some principles maybe, so that you are sure that you pick the right technology at the right time. Mm-hmm. Not adopting too early, also not missing out on stuff. And within LINKIT we have something that we call the technology radar, where we also plot like the technology that we use. It helps us to also govern the governance and to govern the knowledge, so how many people know about this technology, but it also keeps us focused on what is new upcoming technology and triggering us to ask the question like, do we need to adopt this? Will it add extra value? Or are there any impediments that we need to take care of first before we start adopting this, for example? But if you're passionate about technology, that's a kind of a risk. And sometimes you have to press the brake and stop people. And
I have a nice example of a project that was done with technology that was kind of like new, and then actually worked out really well. I was working at Docker in 2012, 2013, just when Docker started.
For people that don't know Docker, can you give a small...
So Docker is a key piece of the cloud native and cloud technologies we use today. It's basically like a way to package your container, to package your application in a container instead of on a virtual machine, or instead of a bare metal machine. It makes your application more light so it can run on your laptop, on someone else's laptop, in the cloud, in another cloud, etc. Typically connected with nowadays terms like Kubernetes and others. Okay. And I was there at the company when they were still working on a different product, when the founder said, let's go make this project open source. And there was talk, okay, so, but you're using the Golang, like a language. And this at the time was a computer language that had been developed by Google, but only opened and released by Google like a year or two before it was, so it was very new. Yes, it fit well with what the product was doing. Like actually the prototypes were built in Python, sorry for the technical details, but it's interesting. And actually it worked out really well because lots of developers thought, oh, this is a cool language. Now there's a project that I can go hack on and contribute to. And because it was an open source project, loads of people started contributing to it. And actually doing so because it was a nice way to learn this language as well. And I think that was then also a factor in success of Docker because it had picked this like new and cool technology. And I've seen this happen some other times as well.
So it can also be an accelerator.
It can be an accelerator, yeah.
Yeah, as long as I think what we've seen before, at some point you need some kind of business case, you need some kind of value that you add.
Of course.
And the experimentation needs to go one direction before, some direction before.
And of course, in this case, like the developers of Docker, they were their own target group, so they knew what was cool and needed. And that's of course often a bit of the pitfall in innovation, that people design something for themselves, but they're not the target group and not the people that are going to use it. And only by talking with those people, you can actually validate that.
Yeah.
So, Dick, you talked about the technology radar before. So this was like an overview of the technologies used within LINKIT, which I think relates to the question that Siets sent in, Siets van de Schaaf. We talked about IoT before, we talked about different kind of technologies. We haven't talked about automation a lot.
No.
What is your experience with automation? Where does it lie on like the spectrum with the other technologies? And is it something that companies can now easily start using, or is it?
Yeah, I think when you work with cloud, you should also work with automation. Automation enables you to automate processes, of course. It will give you an assurance of the outcome. It will give you a kind of disaster recovery scenario because you can easily roll out the same environment again, for example. So it really gives you a kind of assurance on quality and continuity. So from my perspective, when you go cloud, you also automate. And we even have this principle here that we state we design for automation. So whenever we create a new service or a new product, we always consider how are we going to automate that. So that's because it also eliminates a lot of operational issues and resources, because you just hit a button and it rolls out. Sounds simple, is not always simple because you can have a lot of issues, so you have to think up front. So that's also why we stated design for automation also. So for me, automation is very important, and it's also a very wide subject because what are you going to automate? It could be the automation of data ingestion, for example, or the processing of data. It can be the automation of deploying infrastructure on cloud. It can be the automation of configuration of a local server, for example. You can automate a lot of stuff. So it's a very wide subject. Okay. But yeah, I think if you also take a look at the speed that things are evolving currently, technology, it's really hard to keep up. And so you don't have a lot of time, for example, to document everything like we did in the past, write documents about everything. And automation is also kind of documentation. So when you automate stuff, you also have a kind of version control, you have documentation in place. And so it adds a lot of value also to the product that you are automating or to the process that you are automating.
Yeah, because I assume that when you start automating, then you also really need to understand the process that you're automating. So you're sort of double checking why are you doing certain things, what are the steps.
Yeah. It's kind of the same if you're building a solution, you first check the requirements and what is needed here and what am I going to build, and then at the end you validate, of course, the outcome. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so then related to Siet's question, is there something you've run into that was when you had difficulty automating a certain process or a certain ingestion?
The most difficult thing during automation is when you have human interventions. So for example, I can enforce that developers who write code, when they check in their code in a repository, that they add some kind of description what they did. But you cannot enforce that the description also makes sense. So sometimes when you have a lot of check-ins, people will state, well, fix the issue, but it doesn't tell you anything. And you need this description probably because you have to know why somebody did something, you need some insights to make sure or to validate a kind of check-in. And that's really something that needs to be a mindset of people. So when you try to have a manual step in your automation process, making sure that people also take the right steps, that's really hard during automation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Technology is always difficult when you start working with humans.
Yeah.
When you start working with people. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right.
Because I can imagine we've talked a little bit about risk from a business case perspective, but as far as I think I've learned from you as well, is that automation is a great way to decrease risk on other levels. So if you're talking about cloud, it can get pretty expensive, but you can limit that through automation.
Yeah, for example, we have this project that we built. We have automated the whole deployment of the product. So when a customer buys the product, we can just roll it out through automation pipelines. When there's something wrong, maybe there's an outage or a disruption somewhere in a data center, we can use the same script again to deploy it somewhere else. Within a few hours, you can be up and running again. So it also provides you with a kind of disaster recovery scenario. Kind of backup of your stuff. You can also duplicate and reuse automation scripts if you have components that you reuse a lot of times in different propositions, for example, or in different projects. So I think automation has a lot of benefits. But yeah, it's a specific role within cloud. We have also automation engineers here that have specific skills and knowledge also about automation, yes.
Great. Okay. I think that we've covered a lot of different topics today. Before we go out, one final question to Maaike, because I have at the start of the session asked you about one of the innovations that you learned a lot from, maybe went wrong. So I want to give you the opportunity to also talk about an innovation that went right. Anything springing to mind?
Well, I think we've done a lot of things well, and especially when you look more at the core innovations of adding new technology teams to what we do. So we were very early on to hop on the low-code train, for example, because we really saw that happening in the market and with our clients. Yeah, Dick was just talking about a platform where we're automating everything. I think one of the very fun innovations that we're working on right now, and honestly, I can't say that it's a success yet because we're very much in the development, but it's our IoT platform, Hive. And at least we're incorporating a lot of the learnings from the past innovations to really aim to make this a success. Mm-hmm. And the process of learning while making it. Yeah.
IoT platform, what should is that a place where you buy the sensors, or what kind of?
No, so it's actually a platform to make it more easy to roll out the sensors, so to connect all the sensors and use the data from it. So automate that process, to get people started with IoT. Okay,
sounds good. All right, I think we've covered everything. Any questions from the audience? I'm looking at Gino. Anything else? Nope.
No,
okay.
No, the chat is empty.
Okay, then everyone, thank you very much for being here. Of course, thank you to all the experts here. Dick, Maaike, Thatcher, thank you very much for giving us your expertise, answering all these questions from the audience, and a lot of questions from me, because I also new to this topic. What might be good to know, again, to reiterate, we will send you the video of this panel after the session, so you will have it available, and send it to everyone that might be interested within your organization. And if you want to see more events like this that LINKIT is organizing and or hosting, go to linkin.nl/events, and there you will also see, for example, our upcoming data event in April. But more about that on the website. Again, all thank you very much. Thank you at home, and hope to see you next time.